Boss fires employee for no reason. But karma hits the boss hard. The room fell silent. Papers were still scattered across the desk, the fluorescent light above flickering like it was mocking her. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly, she could barely hear the words spilling from her boss's mouth. "You're done here. Pack your things." No warning, no reason, just cold finality. Her hands trembled as she clutched the coffee mug her son had painted for her last Christmas, the one that said "World's Best Mom." She felt the eyes of her co-workers on her, some wide with sympathy, others looking away, too afraid to meet her pain. The sting wasn't just in the firing itself, but in the humiliation, the erasure of years of loyalty and sacrifice. And yet, as Sarah walked out of that office with her dignity in shreds, something was already in motion, something her boss didn't see coming. Because the cruelty of the powerful doesn't always last forever. Sometimes, karma waits in the shadows, patient and merciless. What would you do if the system meant to protect you turned its back, and the only justice left was fate itself? Backhand index pointing right if you believe no one should suffer this way. Share this story, because silence only protects the cruel. Long before that brutal morning in the office, Sarah's life looked like anyone else's, ordinary on the surface, yet rich with a quiet beauty that only someone who paid attention to the small things could see. Every day began the same way. The gentle hiss of the coffee maker filling her modest apartment with warmth, the shuffle of her 8-year-old son, Daniel, dragging his blanket into the kitchen with sleepy eyes. She would tousle his hair, place a bowl of cereal in front of him, and sneak a kiss onto his forehead before rushing him out the door. The smell of toasted bread, the clink of mugs, the faint hum of the radio. It was the soundtrack of their mornings. Sarah lived in a working-class neighborhood, where neighbors still greeted each other on the porch, and the sound of kids playing tag echoed in the afternoons. She wasn't rich, but she was proud. Proud of the small second-hand car that got her to work each day. Proud of the framed drawings Daniel made that covered their walls. Proud that she could keep a roof over his head despite everything life had thrown at her. Her job at the corporate office wasn't glamorous. She worked as an administrative assistant, handling schedules, organizing meetings, ensuring everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. It wasn't the kind of work that drew applause, but it mattered. And Sarah poured herself into it with the kind of dedication that came from knowing her paycheck wasn't just for her. It was survival for her son, to her co-workers. She was dependable, always the one who stayed late to fix the mistakes others left behind. To her boss, Mr. Clayton, she was invisible, or worse, a tool to be used. He rarely looked her in the eye, rarely thanked her, but Sarah brushed it off. She had endured worse in life, and she told herself that hard work and humility would eventually be recognized. There were signs, of course, small cracks in the illusion that everything was stable. A sarcastic comment here, a dismissive wave there. Clayton once snapped at her in front of others for a scheduling error that wasn't hers, his voice sharp enough to cut. She apologized anyway, cheeks burning, because arguing would have only made it worse. Another time, she overheard him laughing with another manager about how assistants are a dime a dozen. She pretended not to hear, clutching her files tighter. But there were also moments of light, her friendships with a few co-workers who saw her worth. Maria from accounting, who often shared her lunch and joked about how Sarah should be running the place. James from IT, who always fixed her computer with a smile. These little connections kept her grounded, made her believe that even in a place so cold, warmth could still be found. After work, Sarah transformed. She wasn't just an assistant. She was Daniel's entire world. Homework spread across the kitchen table, laughter bouncing off the walls as they played board games, late-night whispers before bedtime where he would tell her about the monsters in his dreams. And Sarah, with her tired eyes and aching back, would always promise him that she'd protect him from every monster, real or imagined. She didn't know that the biggest monster was waiting right inside her workplace, hiding behind a tailored suit and a polished smile. For Sarah, life was about balance. She lived on the edge of just enough money to cover bills, just enough energy to keep pushing, just enough faith that tomorrow would be kinder. The fragility of that balance was always there, like a tightrope she walked every single day. And that's why what happened in that office, Those few brutal minutes that tore everything apart wasn't just the loss of a job. It was a collapse of a carefully built world. A world of coffee mugs, school projects, laughter, and resilience. But Sarah didn't know that yet. At this point, she was still waking up each morning, clutching her coffee, straightening her blouse, and walking into a building where her loyalty was taken for granted. The storm was already gathering, but she was too busy surviving to notice the sky darkening above her. The first time Sarah felt the shift, it was subtle, barely noticeable. Mr. Clayton called her into his office, his expression a mix of irritation and impatience. "You scheduled the client meeting for Thursday instead of Wednesday," he barked. Sarah froze. She knew she hadn't. She had triple-checked the calendar, as always. But when she opened her planner to defend herself, she found the entry mysteriously changed in the system. Her pulse raced. Had she really made the mistake? Or was someone tampering with her work? Clayton didn't care. He dismissed her with a cold, "Don't let it happen again." It was a small cut, but it lingered, and it was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Sarah noticed more unsettling patterns. Tasks she had completed vanished from the database, leaving her scrambling to redo them under pressure. Emails she never saw suddenly proved she had ignored instructions. Meetings she wasn't told about were later thrown in her face, as if she'd skipped them deliberately. Her co-workers noticed, too. Maria whispered one day in the break room, "Something's off, Sarah. They're setting you up." But Maria's voice carried fear. She didn't want to get involved. Sarah laughed it off, though her insides nodded. She told herself it was stress, coincidence, anything but what it really was, a slow and calculated erasure of her competence. The microaggressions turned into open hostility. Clayton began criticizing her in front of others. Tiny digs meant to humiliate. "Do I have to explain everything to you?" he snapped during a team meeting, rolling his eyes as laughter rippled across the table. Sarah forced a smile, even as her stomach twisted. She thought of Daniel, his wide eyes when he asked if she'd be able to buy him a new backpack for school. She couldn't afford to lose his job, no matter how unbearable it became. At home, the strain began to show. She snapped more easily at Daniel, her patience fraying. Nights were restless. She would stare at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations in her mind, wishing she had spoken up. Her once bright laughter grew quieter, replaced by long silences over dinner. Daniel noticed, though he was too young to fully understand. "You're sad a lot, Mommy," he whispered one night. She kissed his forehead, blinking back tears, and told him she was just tired. The point of no return came on a Thursday morning. Sarah had been up late helping Daniel finish a school project. She arrived early to work, desperate to get a head start on her tasks. But when she walked into the office, something felt wrong. Her desk was empty. Files she'd been working on were gone. The framed photo of Daniel was missing. Even her pens, her sticky notes, the mug that said "World's Best Mom," gone. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, only to see everything piled into a box outside Clayton's office door. Her co-workers avoided her gaze. Maria sat stiffly, typing too loudly on her keyboard. James offered a fleeting, apologetic glance before lowering his head. "Mr. Clayton wants to see you," the receptionist muttered. Sarah walked into the office, her legs heavy as stone. Clayton leaned back in his chair, smirking like a cat with a trapped mouse. "You're being let go," he said flatly. Sarah's mouth went dry. "Let go? For what reason?" He shrugged. "Performance issues. You've been unreliable. Mistakes. Missed deadlines. The list goes on." Her chest tightened. "That's not true. I've given everything to this job. You know that." But Clayton's eyes were empty, cold. "It's already decided. HR will finalize the paperwork. Be gone by the end of the day." The words hit like gunshots. Sarah's body trembled, her palms slick with sweat. She looked at the box by his door, her life reduced to cardboard and silence. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to demand justice. But her voice caught in her throat, strangled by years of swallowing her pain. She walked out instead, every step heavier than the last, her co-workers watching like spectators at an execution. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at Daniel's project spread across the surface. He beamed with pride, showing her how he had glued the pieces together. She tried to smile, but her hands shook as she held him close. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked softly. She lied. "Of course, baby. Everything's fine." But inside, she was breaking. She had lost her job, her stability, her dignity, all in a single day. And for what? For the amusement of a man who saw her as disposable? Sarah spent the next weeks applying to jobs, each rejection email like another stone crushing her chest. Bills piled up. The rent loomed over her like a storm cloud. She skipped meals so Daniel wouldn't have to. At night, she cried quietly into her pillow, praying he wouldn't hear. But while Sarah's world crumbled, Clayton's arrogance grew. He bragged in meetings about streamlining the team, flaunted his power, strutted around the office as though he were untouchable. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his downfall had already begun. Because karma doesn't strike quickly. It waits. It circles. And when it hits hard. And Sarah's pain was about to become the crack that shattered Clayton's empire. It started quietly like all storms do. A whisper in the break room. A rumor in the elevator. A raised eyebrow in a board meeting. But whispers have a way of growing into roars. One Monday morning, Clayton strutted into the office as usual, his suit pressed, his smile smug. But this time, the eyes that followed him weren't full of admiration or fear. They were sharp, watchful. He didn't know yet that Sarah's story had begun to spread. Maria had broken her silence, unable to bear the injustice. She told HR about the fabricated mistakes, about how Sarah's files had been tampered with. James came forward too, presenting screenshots of missing emails that had been mysteriously deleted from Sarah's account. One by one, voices that had once been quiet now spoke up, painting a picture of Clayton not as a strong leader, but as a manipulative tyrant. At first, Clayton brushed it off. "Disgruntled employees," he scoffed. "They're just bitter." But the evidence grew undeniable. An internal audit revealed inconsistencies, files altered, meetings reassigned, deadlines deliberately sabotaged. And then came the moment that would shatter his illusion of power. A regional director flew in to confront him. The meeting room was filled, HR department heads, even legal counsel. Clayton walked in with the same swagger he always carried, but the air was different. Heavy, electric. "Mr. Clayton," the director began, voice sharp as steel, "we need to discuss some serious allegations." Clayton laughed, too loudly, too forced. "Allegations? Please. I've run this office like a well-oiled machine." But then the evidence was laid out on the table. Emails recovered, witness statements signed, digital footprints traced back to his login. His fingerprints were everywhere. Sweat gathered on his brow. His confident smile faltered. His voice cracked as he tried to explain away the lies. "This is ridiculous. I was framed." But the walls were closing in. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty he had dished out to Sarah came back, like a mirror reflecting his own ugliness. The room fell silent as the director delivered the words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're terminated. Effective immediately." For the first time, Clayton felt what Sarah had felt. That dizzying drop in the stomach, that roaring in the ears, that choking sense of humiliation as eyes bore into him. His hands trembled as he gathered his things, the same way Sarah's had trembled when she held her son's coffee mug. But unlike Sarah, there was no dignity left for him to cling to. His co-workers didn't look away in pity. They watched, some with quiet satisfaction, others with relief, as the man who had tormented them was escorted out like a criminal. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway was no longer commanding. It was pathetic, hollow, and in that moment, Clayton finally tasted the bitterness he had forced on others for years. Across town, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. A message pinged from Maria. "It's done. He's gone. Justice caught up." Sarah stared at the words, her chest tightening. She wasn't rehired. She wasn't compensated for the nights she cried into her pillow. But knowing that Clayton's empire had crumbled, that his arrogance had finally met its match, That was its own kind of justice. She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. The knot in her stomach loosened for the first time in weeks. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered to herself, "Karma doesn't forget." The office moved on quickly after Clayton's fall. That's the way corporations work. One name scratched off the door, another slid in to replace it. But for Sarah, the impact of those weeks lingered far longer than a smug smile ever did. She didn't return to that job. She couldn't. The building itself felt haunted. Every corner stained with memories of humiliation. Every hallway echoing with the silence of co-workers who hadn't spoken up when she needed them most. Instead, she found work at a smaller company, one with fewer perks but kinder faces. The pay wasn't great, but when her new manager asked her opinion during a meeting and actually listened, Sarah felt something she hadn't in years. Seen, respected, human. Still, the scars remained. Nights when she would bolt awake, her heart racing, dreaming she had missed another meeting or forgotten another deadline. Mornings when she stood in the mirror, rehearsing words she might need to defend herself, even though no one was attacking her anymore. Trauma doesn't vanish just because the villain is gone, but there were also moments of healing. Watching Daniel run across the playground, his laughter piercing the fog of her worries. Sharing coffee with Maria, who eventually left the toxic office herself, inspired by Sarah's resilience. Slowly, piece by piece, Sarah rebuilt. And yet, the story was never just about Sarah and Clayton. It was bigger. Because how many Sarahs exist right now? People sitting at desks, giving their all, only be dismissed, humiliated, discarded like they never mattered. How many bosses like Clayton still wield power unchecked, knowing most people are too afraid to speak up? Sarah's story was one of karmic justice. Yes. But for every Clayton who gets exposed, dozens more thrive in silence. For every Sarah who finds a path forward, many remain broken, unheard, and unseen. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Cruelty in the workplace isn't rare. It's a system that rewards arrogance and punishes humility. And unless we recognize it, unless we challenge it, it will keep repeating. Sarah often thought about that day, the cardboard box, the humiliation, the trembling in her hands. She realized something painful but powerful. Her worth had never been tied to that office, or Clayton's approval. It had always been in the laughter of her son, in the quiet strength she carried through sleepless nights, in the resilience that refused to let cruelty define her. That realization didn't erase the scars, but it gave them meaning. And so the story doesn't end neatly. Clayton's career was ruined, but somewhere else another Clayton was surely rising. Sarah rebuilt, but the world didn't magically become fairer. Maybe that's the point. Justice isn't always about clean endings. Sometimes it's about survival, about bearing witness, about making sure stories like Sarah's aren't forgotten. Because silence is what abusers count on. Silence is what lets injustice spread, unseen, unchecked. So ask yourself this. If you were there that day, watching Sarah clutch her son's coffee mug while Clayton stripped away her dignity, would you have stayed silent or stood up for her? This story isn't just Sarah's. It's a mirror. And if it unsettled you, that's good. Discomfort is the first step to change. Backhand index pointing right, share this. Talk about it. Because awareness is more than sympathy. It's the spark that keeps cruelty from thriving in the dark.